Thank you so much. Today I'm speaking about something I'm very passionate about, which is language. Language is something which influences all of our lives. It's the way that we communicate to each other. It's how we express ourselves. It's how we see other people. I'd like to get a quick idea. How many people speak a language other than English or multiple languages? Oh, okay. That's quite a few. I feel like I'm on home turf now. So for me, my language journey began when I was in high school. My two best friends were both Japanese. And when I went over to their house, I would visit them and we'd be playing a computer game because we were really cool kids. And we'd be typing away, speaking in English, and that's really good. And then all of a sudden, the mum would come in and she said, "Mi-chan, どうしてるの？ちょっと手伝ってくれるの？今忙しいでしょ。ゲーム中ですけど." And I thought, wow, that's just this entire world. It's a whole layer of meanings, a lot of sentences, a culture, and it's an entire way of seeing the world which isn't open to me. I started asking, what's that word that you said? Daijoubu. That means okay, Dan. How do I say to eat? How do I say to drink? And I took out a relatively empty workbook, which was actually my maths textbook, so it was a good ground to start writing notes. And I started to work on the language, and I was very motivated because I had this personal connection with someone, and it really inspired me, and I ended up learning how to speak Japanese well enough to interpret. And I feel like the language is still a really big part of who I am and how I see the world. So languages are obviously very important to Australia, and we're moving into what we call the Asian century now, with our major trading partners being from Asian countries. I think there are a number of areas, though, where our education can change and adapt to give Australians the best opportunity to learn languages and to communicate with other people. In our universities, we have a lot of language teachers and a lot of funding which is coming into them. But at the moment, we have departments which have huge demand for languages like Korean, Japanese, Chinese, and we have fewer and fewer teachers. What I would love to see is the funding which is coming from the federal government coming into our universities being used for language teachers, being used to provide funding for events which are happening on campus, instead of having the martial arts class closed down because they need to charge $100 for their participants to join in. We have huge linguistic resources, and having more opportunities for students to interact and exchange languages with each other is something which really needs to happen. And I believe it's going to have a very positive impact on our Australian students. In our high schools, we have a lot of international students coming in, but at a lot of the schools where they teach languages like French and Italian, you have all these Chinese students that are not really engaged. What we can do is we can combine the ESL classroom and also the Chinese classroom and have an hour a week for the students to use the language they've learnt, to interact with each other, and even if they're not speaking all in Chinese, it's the motivation of speaking and using a few sentences which really gives people the momentum and the reason to study in VCE, do it in university, and go on and make a really big difference. I have what I think is quite a big idea, which I'd like to share with you. In our primary schools, we have classes and they're focused on language, but the biggest thing which people get out of them is definitely the culture. When we start in Year 7, we learn good morning and how are you and all that sort of thing again, basically from the start. So in our primary school, we learn about the culture, we can feel something closer to that language, and that's very important because I did Japanese in primary school and it's still with me today. What I'd like to suggest is that we look at teaching Aboriginal languages in our primary schools. It doesn't need to be people speaking it as their, a fluent language, but the culture. I remember at primary school only seeing once an Aboriginal storybook and not really understanding that aspect of Australian culture. We have the resources, we have linguists like me that work on documenting these languages, and I think it would make a really big difference to Australia for the future. I've tried to share a couple of my big ideas around language with you today. Thank you so much.